So, good evening, dear friends. My name is Idioms. Thank you for joining the virtual English writing class with Ryan Bartlett, the representative of the U.S. Embassy in the Kyrgyz Republic. Hi, Ryan.
Hi. Good evening,
So,
everyone.
yeah. Today, Ryan will make a presentation about American idioms, a very interesting topic that will improve your writing and speaking skills and will add colors to your message. Actually, this topic was requested by our viewers, and we really appreciate that you are very active and even make your suggestions during our live sessions. The previous classes were about personal statements and professional correspondence, and today Ryan will talk about American idioms. So, Ryan, it's a great pleasure for us to have you as our guest speaker today. And we really appreciate your time and effort in conducting these wonderful webinars for our educators and English language learners. So I would like to remind our viewers and Bishkek AC followers, if you have comments or questions, please type them in a chat box under this live session. And our lecturer, Ryan Bartlett, will answer them after his presentation. So Ryan, maybe we'll wait a couple of minutes, so that people can join.
Okay.
Uh-huh. So, so
Just
how are you?
good. I was just going to let viewers know that it is not the evening for me. It is the morning for me.
Good morning.
That's why I'm drinking coffee. Normally, I don't think you would want to drink coffee in the evening, but it is 8 o'clock in the morning, my time here in the state of Oregon, in the U.S. So with a 13-hour time difference, which makes working with Bishkek a bit challenging. But just to let you know, I usually don't drink coffee at night. So.
Yeah. So thank you. I see people started joining. So I can share your presentation
Okay.
once you're ready. Okay, can you see the presentation?
I can.
Okay.
Looks great.
So the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Aigarim, for your help filling in here as the moderator for our virtual writing series. And again, good evening, everyone. Happy to be here with you all the way from America, 13 hours behind you all. So it is Wednesday morning here, 8 o'clock, and we're here to talk a little about American idioms. The last couple classes that we had were more about formal writing. This one isn't as much about formal writing because idioms are generally only used in conversation or in informal writing. Rarely do you see most idioms in any kind of formal writing in English. So yeah, this one will be talking about idioms because one of our viewers recommended it would be very interesting to learn a little bit more about idioms and how to use them. Idioms are they're very colorful. They're very interesting, and they definitely tell something about the culture. I think most languages have idioms. Aigarim, how do you say idiom in Russian? Just so everyone knows exactly what we're talking about.
We call it phraseologism.
Wow. Okay. Much easier in English. And what about Kyrgyz? You
The
have
same?
it was the same in Kyrgyz. Okay.
Yeah.
Same idea. Okay. So great. I think we can continue. I think if everyone has a good idea of what we're talking about now, yeah. So they're essentially short expressions, usually phrases, and the interesting thing about idioms is that they represent a meaning that's different than the words that they're used to make them, right? So they have instead of a literal meaning, they have a figurative meaning. So you'll see some examples here. I have mostly what I'm going to give you today is just kind of an introduction to idioms. It would be impossible for me to list all of the idioms that we use in American English, but I'm just going to give you some of the more common ones and ones that I have some very interesting graphics to accompany that will hopefully help you understand that idiom. Igor, you can advance to the next slide.
Okay.
So again, yeah, what are idioms? They are informal. So I just want to stress that that's not something that you generally want to use in any kind of formal writing. And they have a meaning that is not very obvious, right? If you read the words and you look up the individual words and you try to make sense of it, it doesn't make sense at all. So it's not something that you can find in the dictionary typically. You would be able to take that idiom or that phrase, that expression, and put it into Google, and then you will see the definition, the actual figurative definition rather than the literal definition. So literal means word by word, the meaning for that. But that combination of words ends up meaning something very different. So they can be confusing, but that's why I want to give you some ideas of how to recognize them. And as far as grammatically, how you use them, they can either be used as part of a sentence, or they can be used by themselves. So standalone, just an expression all by themselves. And again, as we go through some examples, I'll explain if those are a part of a sentence or by themselves. As we already mentioned, yes, these do exist in Russian and in Kyrgyz as well. Agarim, I want you to maybe think of a couple examples, maybe one good example in Russian and one in Kyrgyz. You can give people as examples of what we're talking about. Typically, you can't translate idioms. I think some of them you might be able to, but for the most part, idioms are very connected to the language itself. So it doesn't really work to translate them. You just need to learn them in their native language, in their original language. And then, of course, look at them in context, right? Look at them in the whole conversation or the whole written piece that you're looking at. So yeah, you can definitely use these in writing, just not formal writing. So you could use these in creative writing or storytelling or poetry, or of course, informal emails or chats. I think you'll see these a lot in common English, not only written, spoken, but also written, just not formal. So just want to make sure that everyone understands that. It's possible you could see some, but for the most part, you want to avoid these informal written English. So with that, and please, there's not a lot of rules really grammatically with idioms, but this is in a nutshell. And that's also an idiom, right? In a nutshell. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these just are common in American English. So in a nutshell, which means basically that's all there is. It's a small amount of information. This is what you want to think about when you're looking at idioms. So other than that, we're just going to start looking at some examples of American idioms that we use pretty commonly in expressions and conversation. Okay, Agarim, you can advance to the next slide. Okay, well, one of the more common ones is it's not rocket science, right? So I can use that as an example. American idioms are not rocket science, right? So what does that mean? We're not talking about rockets. We're not talking about science. if I say something is not rocket science, it means it's not very complicated, right? Because as you can see from this image, rocket science tends to be very, very complicated, very complex, very difficult to understand for most people. But idioms, the more you see them, the more you understand them. It's not very complicated to use them correctly. So that is one good example, and fairly easy to understand, I think. Clearly, we're not talking about rockets, but if I say, yep, learning English, it's not rocket science. Well, learning English in general can be a little more complicated, so that might not be the most appropriate. But yeah, if we say using idioms in conversation, it's not rocket science. So that's one example. All right, next slide. The grass is greener on the other side. Okay, that is a great expression. I use this all the time. Very, very common. The grass is greener on the other side. What does that mean? Are we talking about grass? Are we talking about colors? Are we talking about what are we talking about here? We're talking about something that you don't have access to is more attractive than what you have access to. Another interesting image that you could see if you put this phrase, if you put this idiom in Google, you would see, and then there's a cartoon that's pretty common. You see two cows, each with their head through the fence, eating the grass on the other cow's side of the fence, right? So, yeah, if you're an animal in a corral with a fence, which in Kyrgyzstan you don't have fences a lot. Mostly animals just they don't. There's not another side to the field. But in the U.S., when you have animals in fields eating grass, you often have fences. So if there's a field that's divided by a fence and you have animals on each side, they're looking at the other side of the grass thinking, wow, that grass looks more green than the grass that I have. So it's essentially thinking what somebody else has is better than what you have, just because you don't have that same thing. So it's a common expression. I'd be interested to hear if you have anything like this in Russian or Kyrgyz. The same idea. Probably you would use different words, but maybe some of these are, they could be directly translated. Ikanim, do you have anything like this in either Russian or Kyrgyz?
Yes, I know that we have, but now I cannot remember.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
there is a saying, there is an idiom. Yeah,
Yeah.
very similar to this.
Nice. Okay, well, yeah, for anybody watching, if you can think of any good equivalents to any of these idioms in either Russian or Kyrgyz, I'd be interested to know how they translate. But let's go ahead and continue with the next slide. Okay, so living on the edge. This is a great image here of a very small house living on the edge of a cliff. I don't think that's a house that I would want to live in, although I have been known to live on the edge. Living on the edge means basically taking risks, right? If you're living on the edge, you're doing something that most people don't do, usually because it's some kind of risky activity or risking, yeah, whatever you're doing. Again, it could be for work, could be for pleasure, but you're really living on the edge because you're taking a chance on what you're doing. So, people could say that because I normally live in Bishkek, I'm living on the edge, right? So for most Americans, living that far away is risky, and it's not normal. Or, for example, I do like to do a lot of mountain biking. So for a lot of people, that would be considered living on the edge as well, because that's could be considered a risky activity. But that is one of the common idioms we have. Next slide. To button your lips. All right, so this is a great image as well. To button your lip doesn't have anything to do with a button, but it does have a little bit to do with your lips, possibly, if you're talking about somebody speaking. But to button your lip means to be quiet, right? So this one, I think it might be a little bit easier to understand, right? So if you if you really remember this image, to button your lip means you're not talking. You need to be quiet. So button your lip. You can just tell somebody that. And this is not used in a sentence. I didn't mention the other two. So living on the edge, that's usually part of a sentence. The grass is greener on the other side. That's all. That is used alone. Also, button your lips is used alone. It can be a command, button your lip, or she had to button her lip because she didn't want to make anybody sad, or for whatever reason. But to button your lips means to not share information. And this could also be the person didn't write something as well. Like if they were in a chat or some kind of a written conversation, to button your lip could mean, don't say that. Don't say something or don't write something. Okay, next slide. Time flies. That's the most basic expression, but often you'll hear when you're having fun. That's kind of the implied part of time flies. So what does that mean? Does that mean birds take clocks up into the sky? No. Does that mean when you wear a watch on your wrist and you go on an airplane? Is that what they're talking about? No. That's not what they're talking about. Time flies means that time passes much more quickly. Often when you're doing something usually fun, or when you're really busy, if you enjoy your work and you are very focused and concentrating on a certain activity, and all of a sudden you look at your clock and, well, it's already lunchtime, or it's already time to go home. Yeah, time flies. Sometimes you're not really paying attention to the passage of time until it's much later, and you don't realize that a lot of time has passed. So the basic expression is time flies, and you'll hear people say that just on its own. It doesn't always have to be as part of a sentence, but often you'll hear it when you're having fun, right? So that's basically like if there's an activity that you're doing that's almost finished, that's an appropriate time to use that. Wow, time flies. Like I didn't expect this to last, to go so quickly. So that's that expression.
Yeah, we have the same saying.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, in Russian.
And do you also say when you're having fun, or?
No, without when you're having fun, but time flies, like время летит.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
And in Kyrgyz also, вакыт учкан kuş, like time is like flying bird.
Okay.
Very similar.
Yeah, that would be very connected to this picture here as well. That's great. Okay, good. Well, hopefully that'll help you remember that expression. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is a funny image. There's an elephant in the room. Are we talking about elephants in this expression? No. Are we talking about rooms? Usually not. I could even have you might not have heard this expression.
No.
Yeah. This one maybe is a little bit less common, but this basically means that there is something that everyone knows in a conversation, but nobody is talking about. So yeah, it's something that maybe is considered taboo, something that even though everyone is aware of this thing, and usually it's something maybe like a problem or some kind of an issue that nobody wants to directly talk about, but everyone knows what it is, and you're still having a conversation very indirectly about something. So there's an elephant in the room means, yeah, the elephant is the big thing that everyone knows, but nobody's talking about. So very interesting expression.
Yeah.
And then there's another. Go ahead to the next slide. I don't know if I put the next one around here. Okay, this is burning the candle at both ends. I think there's another expression that maybe I didn't include here, but kind of opposite to there's an elephant in the room is don't beat around the bush. I don't think I have that in here, but don't beat around the bush. That is a very American, of course, expression, but the American idea as well. Don't beat around the bush means talk directly about what you want to say, right? Don't talk indirectly. And I think, at least in Russian writing specifically, I think it tends to be a bit more indirect than American English writing. That tends to be a lot more direct. So don't beat around the bush would be kind of the opposite, as there's an elephant in the room. And this slide here we're looking at is a picture of a candle burning at two ends, and the expression is, yeah, when you burn the candle at both ends, that means you are doing something very, very fast. Right, so that candle is going to last half as long, of course, if you burn both ends at the same time. So it's a very simple idea, I think. But of course, we're not talking about candles. We're not talking about burning. We're just talking about, again, the passage of time. So if you see this, they're talking about something that happens very quickly. Like if I'm trying to think of an example. If I am burning the candle at both ends, that means I'm doing a lot of work. So example, if I'm multitasking, if I'm reading a book and writing a paper at the same time, maybe I'm burning the candle at both ends. So that's that expression. Okay, next slide. All right, couch potato. Probably most of you have heard this before, and maybe not even consider it an idiom. This is something, again, that can be used just by itself. Typically, a couch potato is what you call somebody who basically he or she sits on the couch a lot, typically, but a lot of times people aren't sitting on the couch now. They're sitting in a chair, maybe in front of their computer or some type of device, and they're not moving very much, right? They're very sedentary. They're kind of lazy, right? A couch potato is somebody who tends to be a bit lazy. So what they're not showing in this picture is some kind of a screen. Traditionally, a couch potato is somebody who just sits on the couch and watches television all day or more than they should, right? That's generally not considered a very productive use of your time. Why is it called a potato? Good question. Potatoes normally are not found on couches, but maybe it's because if you sit on a couch and don't exercise, maybe you'll become round, and maybe you'll look like a big potato after a while. And also, I think traditionally people, when they would sit on a couch and watch TV, maybe you'd eat potato chips. So a lot of these idioms really have pretty surprising and entertaining original definitions. We'll talk about that in the end, but it's fun to try to guess why somebody came up with that expression. Okay, next slide. Okay, a sitting duck. This one usually is used in a sentence, but it's not talking about ducks or really any birds. It's not talking about sitting, but a sitting duck is considered somebody who is very vulnerable, right? So a duck and this goes back to hunting. In America and many other places, we hunt ducks occasionally, and normally hunters will shoot ducks that are flying in the air, right? You don't usually shoot birds when they're on the ground sitting, because normally if a duck sees a hunter, he will fly away, right? Birds, that's their kind of defense mechanism. They fly. But if a bird doesn't fly and a hunter wants to shoot it, well, it's very, very vulnerable. So a sitting duck is somebody who is very vulnerable in whatever situation they're doing. So you don't want to be a sitting duck. An example of this being used in English was, the soccer player could be considered a sitting duck if the goalie was maybe not paying attention, right? So the goalie could be considered the sitting duck, and if somebody scored a goal and he wasn't paying attention, he was very vulnerable in that time. So that would be an example of how you could use that. Okay, next slide. Okay, the big picture. Again, this is an expression that is typically used in a sentence, and it's not talking about any kind of an image, and it's not talking about size. So again, not to do with the words, but it means the big picture means kind of the full scene of something. So the words do have something to do with the meaning, but it's not a clear connection to the actual meaning of that phrase, the big picture. So if I'm talking about details a lot, and instead of focusing on the context, right? Another way to think about it is a micro view versus a macro view. And a lot of times you'll hear 10,000 foot view. So that means like if you're in an airplane and you're looking at Kyrgyzstan, it looks a lot different than if you're flying very low to the ground and you're looking at Kyrgyzstan, right? So when you can see the big picture, you can see the context, you can see the macro view, you get the full idea when there's the big picture. So if you have a big picture about idioms, that means you're not looking at a couple specific idioms and being really focused. You're just looking at, in general, how idioms fit into American English, for example. Okay, next slide. Okay, to be the apple of someone's eye. This is a potentially disturbing photo. To see an eye on an apple is a little strange, but we're not talking about an eye on an apple. To be the apple of someone's eye means that somebody loves you, right? Or somebody cares very much about you. I get him if I say you are the apple of your husband's eye. Of course, that means that your husband loves you very much. And this origin of this expression, I have no idea, but this is something that you could just Google, the apple of someone's eye, and then after that expression, you could say origin. And it'd be very interesting to see what you could find. I didn't research all of these, but as you'll see later, that's a tip if you want to know more about these idioms and where they came from. It's very interesting. Some have very surprising histories. But yeah, that one generally just means that if you are the apple of someone's eye, the other person loves you. Okay, next slide. All right, to raise the roof. We're not talking about roofs necessarily, and we're not talking about bringing anything up. To raise the roof means to have a party. And I think my understanding of how this is used, maybe the original meaning was if you have the music so loud in a building, the music kind of pushes the roof off of the building. You can think of it like that. So so if you said, I had a big party last night, I really raised the roof, kind of means it was just a really fun party, and maybe loud. Maybe it would be more like a dance party with loud music. So yeah, pretty basic idiom, specific meaning, but yeah, interesting. Okay, next slide. All right, to cut corners. This is a photo of a corner with a line to actually cut the part of that corner off. So to cut corners means to take a shortcut, right? This could be literal shortcut, like if you're cutting corners to get somewhere, you're not taking the most designated path. You're kind of maybe taking a shortcut, or a way to the more direct route to get to somewhere. But it also means to do something a bit quicker, maybe not as well, right? To cut corners generally is not considered a good thing. If you're cutting corners, you're taking shortcuts that will reduce the quality of the product you're doing. So if I was cutting corners on making this presentation, for example, maybe I wouldn't include images. I would just put the idioms and kind of try to describe what an image would look like, because I'm not putting in as much time as I should. You can also cut corners by not paying for something like you should as well. So if you're trying to save money, you can also cut corners, which generally is not considered a good thing if you refer to it like that. But very common to hear somebody talking about cutting corners. Okay, next slide. All right, I think this is our last example here, and I thought this would be a good one to end it with. The sky is the limit. So the sky, we're not talking about sky. Indirectly, we are talking about a limit. So if you hear somebody say the sky is the limit, and this is an expression that is a sentence, you don't need to have this as part of a sentence. It's used alone. The sky is the limit, meaning you can do whatever you want, right? Because the sky really is not a limit. You can keep going past the sky if you want to. So yeah, the sky's the limit means you can do whatever you want. There means basically there is no limit. So if I say learning idioms, the sky's the limit. You can keep learning more and more and more idioms, and you really don't ever have to stop. And occasionally native speakers will come across an idiom that is new, so I could even learn a new idiom potentially. Okay, next slide. All right, so this is the end of my presentation. I just wanted to leave you with some tips for learning idioms. If you just type in Google American idioms or learning American idioms, you will see many, many, many resources. And I wouldn't worry about credibility as much when you're learning about idioms. I think most sources you find will be adequate. You'll see the actual idiom. Hopefully you'll see it in context, some kind of a sentence or a conversation. That's always very useful. And then maybe even you'll see the origin of that idiom, which is very interesting and often funny. But there is one place I'll refer you to directly that you can get started at looking at idioms, there's a great list of idioms. So it has the idiom in one column, and it has the not the literal definition, but the figurative definition. So the definition that we use it for. And then it says if you use that in part of a sentence or if you use it by itself. And then they have the list of idioms broken up into the most common, less common, and then more rare idioms. So that's a really great resource for looking at idioms. I wouldn't worry about the rare idioms unless you have a pretty high level of English. So yeah, look at the examples. I think that's the most important thing about idioms is don't study them on their own. Study them in some type of conversation or dialogue or some type of writing. And again, if you have a specific idiom, like the grass is always greener, you can just type that in and then say usage or examples, and you'll get plenty of examples that way. Again, here I'm saying for extra credit, if you have extra time and you're interested, you can research the original meanings of these idioms, and they can be quite entertaining to learn how those came about. And then, of course, just like everything that we've talked about in virtual writing classes, you need to practice, right? You need to practice to make perfect. It's good that you understand these, right? Comprehension is important. And that I think can be difficult, but once you understand them, then it's good to practice them, to use them in conversation, to use them in informal writing, hopefully with a native speaker, and then they can give you feedback on if that's a good usage or not. But that is a pretty good overview, a kind of an introduction, if you will, to American idioms. As Aigerim said, we're happy to take any questions that you have about idioms, using them, or origins. I can tell you if I know. And looks like, yeah, there are some questions here.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. It was really interesting. And we have here a comment from our English language fellow, Heidi de Mello. So she's asking, she's commenting that great image to illustrate this idiom. So can I show what idiom it was?
Sure, of course.
This one. Apple of someone's eye. Yeah, so it's great
Yeah.
image to illustrate this idiom, she says. Thank you,
Yeah.
Heidi.
Great. Hi, Heidi. I'm glad you you enjoyed that image. I can't take credit for all of these images. I didn't create them. I found them online. But yeah, it's recommended when you're teaching or learning idioms to find graphics or images of some sort to go with these, because the combination of words often is so confusing that seeing an image, and hopefully you'll keep those images in your mind when you're remembering these idioms. It should make them easier to remember.
Okay, so I can close the presentation then?
Yeah, that should be fine.
Okay. So, yeah, so let's read questions if we have. I see here comments. Hello, dear colleagues, says Aida. And Elizat Tohtanalieva, she's asking, does British English have these idioms?
Yes, British English has many of these idioms. British English has some different idioms. So again, I have been mostly talking about American idioms because those are the ones that I'm more familiar with, being an American. I think I would definitely understand some idioms that are used more in the UK. Probably you're not going to hear me use them, nor can I. Okay, well, yeah, I can think of one actually off the top of my head. Mad as a hatter. So if you hear somebody say that a person is as mad as a hatter, that's more of a British idiom, and it kind of means somebody is crazy. Because a hatter, I don't actually know what a hatter is, but it's somebody in, I think in ancient times in British society, and somebody who was crazy. So if you hear somebody say mad as a hatter, it means that person is a little bit crazy. But that's not something that you would hear in American English very much. But yes, to answer your question, British English does have probably most of these idioms. But you could, again, Google search British idioms to get a different list and then compare those with what you find for American idioms. There are a lot more similarities than differences, I would say. But there's definitely idioms that we use in the US that they don't in the UK, and vice versa.
Thank you, Ryan, for your
Mhm.
answer. Hope, yeah, it was useful. And let me check other questions and comments in the chat box.
I do
Okay.
see the last one. Are there any idioms which don't have analogs in our language?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And not sure if I fully understand the question. Maybe that have the same like equivalence in Russian. Do you think that's what the question means? Analog.
Um, Analogs in our languages, are there any idioms which don't have so are there uh, idioms that doesn't exist in, for instance, in Russian language, but uh, in the US there is a idiom that will never be translated or doesn't exist. I guess so. Yeah.
I think Igorim, you might be better positioned to answer that question. I think some of these idioms that we talked about, I think you have equivalents in Russian or Kyrgyz, but I think, do you think most of them you do, or most of the examples that I gave you don't have in Russian or Kyrgyz?
Yeah, I think there is equivalence in some point, but as you said, I think we cannot translate it word to word.
Right.
But yeah, there is. I think so that we have very similar, close to meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And even if you don't have the same idiom, you might have a different idiom that expresses the same idea. And that's even more interesting, right? You're using different words to really convey the same idea.
yeah.
Like, I don't know, do you have anything, the grass is greener on the other side? I think you said you don't have anything like that. But basically, it just means that you like what somebody else has more than what you have. Do you
Yes,
have?
I have like I know that there is idiom in English that when pigs fly.
Uh-huh. When
Yeah,
pigs fly. Yeah.
yeah. So we have equivalent of this that когда рак свистнет на горе, so something that will never happen.
Right.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
When
Exactly.
when when lobster will whistle on the top of the mountain, it's to translate it. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So that's perfect. That's another example of, the focus is on the meaning, and and that is so important when you're studying language in general, but definitely idioms is really focus on the meaning, because that's the point of language, right? You're conveying meaning. So if
Mhm.
there's different ways to convey that, that's always very interesting to me. Totally different idioms, totally different visualizations, right? Because that's what you have when you have an idiom that means nothing what the words say. It paints a picture in your mind. You're looking at lobsters on the top of a mountain. It's kind of a powerful image. Of course, that will never happen, uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, neither will you see pigs flying. So that's great.
Yeah, we have comments here. Really nice presentation, getting from educator. And Shaina is also commenting, so many beautiful Kyrgyz proverbs. I find the subject to be very different. There are so many that reference horses, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Um,
there's I can think of that's one idiom that references horses. I'm sure there are many more, but the one that comes to mind is "Don't look a gift horse in the mouth."
oh, we have the same.
Oh, really? You have the same
Yeah.
one? Okay, and the same words essentially.
In Russian language, there is this very similar idiom. Не заглядывать зубы дареному коню.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's like the translation is the same.
It's the same. Okay, and the meaning essentially means if somebody gives you something, um,
Hmm.
don't inspect it. Right?
Yeah,
It's poor form. It's a little bit rude to be critical of a gift. So yeah,
yeah.
that's great.
So Ryan, we have another question for non-native English language speakers. So how to effectively memorize the idioms?
Wow. I people do different things to memorize. I think for me and a lot of people, you would probably use flashcards. I think maybe one of the most effective ways would be uh, to have an image on one side of the flashcard, and then on the other side have the actual idiom um, in the writing of it, and maybe an example of using it. But I think visually, at least I'm a very visual person. It would be good to on one side of the flashcard just have these images, and feel free to take the images that I provided, or if you do a Google search, images for idioms or American idioms or British idioms, you'll see a lot of interesting images that like the ones I was displaying today. So, or even better, draw your own picture, right? Draw your own little sketch of when you think of that, like an apple of someone's eye. Very easy to draw an apple with an eye on it, right? So that would be on one side of the flashcard, and on the other side would be the actual words, and then maybe an example of how you would use it. So if it were me and I was trying to memorize a list of idioms, I think that's probably what I would do.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Hmm.
we have another question. So, what are your commonly used idioms? Your favorite one that you
I
always
love the
use?
grass is always greener on the other side, because I catch myself um, being envious, right, of maybe what somebody else has and I don't have that, and not appreciating what I have, that maybe is even better. But just the thought that because you can't have something, it makes you want it even more. I think that's funny. Time flies. I definitely use that one. Time flies when you're having fun, because I often am fully absorbed in whatever activity I'm doing, and I don't realize, wow, okay, it's already been 5 hours since I started this thing. I like that one. Um, yeah, most of the ones that I included today are ones that I use fairly regularly, but those are my favorites, I think.
Yeah, we have in Kyrgyz language, we have the very similar idiom, uh, apple of an eye, to to keep it like an apple of an eye. So we're taking care of something and to, yeah, to,
Something
how to
that's
say,
precious.
protect. Yeah, to protect. And so very
Uh-huh.
similar to someone's, uh, what did you say? Someone's,
Yeah, well, if you're the
apple,
apple of someone's eye, it means that
someone's
person loves
eye.
you.
Yeah.
Or you're very, very important to that person, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you're valuable. They appreciate you. I
Yeah.
think generally, if you're the apple of someone's eye, it kind of means that there's a romantic interest involved. Maybe not so much in the Russian
Yeah.
usage.
Yeah. Okay.
Interesting.
So I think we do not have any other questions, mostly comments.
Okay.
Yeah. So um, thank you, Ryan, once again. Yeah, as we learned from today's class, idioms help us to think outside the box and make our message more interesting to readers and listeners. So, dear friends, stay tuned with us See you at our Bishkek American Space Facebook Live tomorrow. We will have the virtual book launch of the Kyrgyz translation of Hidden Figures with the US Ambassador Donald Lu and Nishtakbek Janadilov. So wish you all to stay healthy and have a good night, friends, and have a good day.
Thank
Ryan.
you, everyone, for tuning in. And also, if you have any other suggestions of topics that you would like to know more about for English writing, please let us know, and maybe we'll be able to do another virtual writing class for you. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone, for tuning in, and have a good night. Until
Good
next
night.
time.
Bye.